because this is definitely rivaling what we went through in the Great Depression, and it's likely to come. And I want to talk about that because people are frustrated and they're scared, and they should be. And I want to talk about two things. When I do my job, my day job as a management consultant, and the way I was trained to do my job was first you identify the source of the problem, because if you attack the symptoms of the problem, it's going to stay. You know, kind of like if you have a headache and you give it an aspirin, but it happens to be a brain tumor, nothing's going to happen to cure it. All right? So look for the source of the problem and then fix it. Figure out how to fix it and figure out the impact it has on a lot of different things. And the truth to tell is this, folks, from best I can tell. Some of you may disagree with me, and that's fine, because that's how I learn, and listening to other people is how I'll get better as your congressperson. This is what happened. In 1929, there was a situation where credit was way cheap, way cheap. Anybody could get credit. And they only had to put 1, 2, 3% down. And what would happen then is they were touting the stock market and saying, every day, people, get involved in the stock market, get involved in the stock market. And they were. And they were borrowing money from the banks and investing in the stock market with cheap credit. And they were making lots of money. And we're in the money, and all that stuff happened, okay, with dancing balls and girls and all like that.
The Charleston.
Yeah, the Charleston happened. That was the good part of it. So then the bank said, well, let's use depositors' money, let's use pensioners' money, and let's invest it in the stock market, because then our pensions will grow, we'll make money. So they invested other people's money, senior citizens' money, everybody's money in the stock market. And then one day, that bubble, like all bubbles, which you learned at 3 years old when you did your first bubble, maybe I was precocious, I don't know. Yeah, it pops. Bubbles pop. And that one popped. Now, in 1933, not when he got sworn in, but right after, Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, this is never going to happen in this country again. And we're going to make sure it doesn't, and this is how we're going to do it. We're going to separate banks from securities from insurance companies. All right? The banks are where you put your money. It's going to be low risk, but it's going to be low reward. But the pension money and everything else goes in here. This is the people's money. And they're not allowed to invest it in the securities companies. They're not allowed. If you want to play securities, great, because that's the way America grows and builds and all like that, so fine. But we're not taking the people's money over here. And we're not going to let that flow over to the insurance companies, because if it should ever all fall down like it has this time, people will be without their health insurance and without their medical insurance, and we can't have that. That law was put into effect and called the Glass-Steagall Act, and it stayed into effect until 2000. Now, there was chipping away at it in the 80s, but it stayed in effect. Those walls stayed clear until 2000, 8 years ago. 8 years ago, with the Bank Modernization Act, or the Graham-Bleley, I can't say it. Something like that. And Leach.
Yeah, the deregulation.
They took the walls down, all of them. And then shortly thereafter, they took the walls down in the way we do commodities markets like gas and food. They took those down. And to make a very long story short, because then the international market said, oh, why don't you self-regulate yourselves, Wall Street and commodities market, you'll do fine. Because the free market system will take care of it. So they were self-regulating. And people were getting subprime loans, you know, your cousins, your nephews, you know, somebody that's never worked for more than tips, were getting loans with no money down and a house. And you're going, whoa, this doesn't look good. And they thought an arm was something on the end of your shoulder. And then the arm came due, and loans began to default. Credit cards. People had 10, 15, 20 credit cards available to anybody in college. Credit was easy, easy, easy. And it looked like it was 18 annual percentage rate. It wasn't. Because let's say I had a $1,000 balance and I paid off $250. What did they charge me with next next month. Did they take off the $250 and charge me just on the $750? No, they charged me on the $1,000. As long as there were a balance that went forward. So there was all kinds of deceptiveness going on in our markets in America. But it was growing, and we were in the money, weren't we? We were in the money. And we were flipping houses here in Charleston and making fortunes, okay? And then what happens to bubbles? It bursts. And now Congress is trying to tell you, they're all going like, it was their fault, it was their fault, their fault, their fault. They came later. Congress allowed the walls to come down that protected you and me since 1933. Congress. And every single person in Congress is responsible for letting that happen. And that includes both Obama and McCain. And it most certainly includes my opponent, Henry Brown. All right? So what I'm asking you to do, if you have to write in your dead grandmother's name, do not vote for Henry Brown. If you can't deal with me, that's fine, that's your choice. But don't vote for anybody from city council on up that doesn't get that we live in a complex world. We live in a very complex world. There is no more, oh, I'm good at constituent services, and I've been married 48 years. Those days are over, folks. And if you keep electing people in South Carolina to represent you that tout themselves that way, then when it falls down, look at yourself in the mirror and say, I had a part in this too. But don't let them convince you. Wall Street does what Wall Street does, which is take advantage of every opportunity they were given until it fell. It was Congress. It was all the senators, all the congressional representatives, and the administration that allowed this to happen. They could have known, they should have known. Some of them did know.
But they didn't get it done. Yeah.
Some of them did know. Now, what do you do? Because that's the second part of the problem. That's the source of the problem. I ain't for just saying, nah, nah, nah. This is how you fix it. I'm going to tell you the first 3 or 4 things, and then if you want to hear more, I've got 20 of them. I'll tell them all to you. The first thing you do is you separate banks from securities from insurance companies so it never happens again. And let's learn it this time so we don't have to keep doing it over and over and over. All right? Separate it. Number 2, you repeal the Commodities Modernization Act because it's responsible for at least 25 to 40% of the increase in gas hikes. How many were alive in 1970 and were in the lines for the gas? Me too, okay? Hour and a half, 2 hours. When you have a supply problem, you wait in line. We have a supply problem right now in some places, but it isn't because of what's going on in the Arab countries. It's because we have a storm down in Galveston that shut down the refineries. Before, when the prices went whoop overnight, that was entirely about, not entirely about, but it was largely about the commodities market and the deregulation of the commodities market. So it went nuts. So we repealed the Commodities Act. Modernization, I love that act. 3, in the 30s, Roosevelt set up the Homeowners Loan Corporation because you know what? When they first came out last weekend, they had nothing in there for the middle class, did they? At all. Nothing. Let's bail out the big companies. And they said it'll trickle down. I'm so scared of trickle down. If anybody says trickle down, from now on I'm going up. Trickle down doesn't work at anything, all right? So they said, well, it'll trickle down to the middle class. We got to protect the middle class. And they did in the 30s. What they said is the government will become the Homeowners Loan Corporation. And we will take these arms, which they didn't call them that then, and we will amortize these loans over 30 years and give payments to people that they can afford so they can stay in their house. And the government did that, and what happened at the end of it is the government actually made money on it, all right? And commercial loans could be dealt with that way too, but in 33 they just did that. So that's number 3. And those are the 3 things that need to happen right away. And the 4th thing that I want to say, and you can hear the other 16 or look at on my website for them when you ask me questions. This is probably the most important, even though it's the most obscure. We must stop identifying as Democrat and Republican and identify as Americans, because the only times that we touch that part of us that is most creative and most resilient and most smart is when we stop this foolishness about Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, and we work for the benefit of all Americans in making something happen. So I'm done talking. I'll answer your question.